New Testament. Today we are reading from Corinthians 1 or Corinthians 7, verse 1 through 24. This is what it says. Now, with regard to the issue you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. That's what they wrote. But because of these immoralities, each man should have relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. A husband should give his wife her sexual rights, and likewise a wife to her husband. It is not the wife who has rights to her own body, but the husband. And in the same way, it is not the husband who has rights to his own body, but the wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual agreement for a specific time, so that you may devote yourself to prayer. Then resume your relationship, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I say this as a concession, not as a command. I wish everyone was as I am, but each has his own gift from God, one this way and another that. To the unmarried and the widows, I say it is best for them to remain as I am. But if they do not have self-control, let them get married, for it is better to marry than to burden with sexual desires. To the married, I give this command, not I, but the Lord: a wife should not divorce her husband, but if she does, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. A husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord. If a brother has a wife who is not a believer and she's happy to live with him, he should not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who is not a believer and he is happy to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified because of the wife, and the unbelieving wife because of the husband. Otherwise, your children are unclean, but now they are holy. But if the unbeliever wants a divorce, let it take place. In these circumstances, the brother or sister is not bound. God has called you in peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will bring your husband to salvation, or how do you know, husband, whether you will bring your wife to salvation? Nevertheless, as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each person, so he must live. I give this sort of direction in all the churches. Was anyone called after he was circumcised? He should not try to undo his circumcision. Was anyone called who is uncircumcised? He should not get circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Instead, keeping God's commands is what counts. Let each one remain in that situation of life in which he was called. Were you called as a slave? Do not worry about it. But if indeed you are able to be free, make the most of the opportunity. For the one who is called in the Lord as a slave is the Lord's freeman. In the same way, the one who is called as a free person is Christ's slave. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. In whatever situation someone was called, brothers and sisters, let him remain in it with God. So a couple things here that I think are important. One of them is talking about married couples, and I think one of the things when we look at this, Paul does have a lot to say about sex, but I think this passage really can be broadened about that. The idea of, and we talked about rights yesterday some, but the idea of rights, the idea of mutuality in the marriage, and that the idea here is a married couple, they are mutual. They are to look to the mutual good for each other, and actually, they are, in this, they were on equal footing. Paul makes that pretty clear in here, and so that's something to understand. The idea that they are to look to the best for the other person, and so that's one of the things I think Paul is getting at. And then he talks a lot about married and unmarried and divorcing and stuff like that, and really, I think part of the thing is, and it goes on the idea of, well, in what circumstance were you called? Essentially, in what circumstance did God make himself known to you and you accepted Christ as Lord and Savior? Because in those circumstances, God isn't saying, well, you need to get out of those. If you were became a believer and your husband or wife wasn't, Paul's saying you don't, that doesn't mean you leave, because God may have a purpose. And I think sometimes we don't think about our circumstances as always as opportunities for what God is up to. And I find it amazing the different ways God uses circumstances in my life and others' lives to achieve things that they never would have thought. And so one of the things here is sometimes, we get ahead of God on a lot of things, and we're like, well, I'm in this circumstance, I need to get out of it because now this has changed, and I need to do this, but really maybe God has some purpose for where you're at. Maybe God has a purpose for your situation. And Paul was pretty clear that we'll be with God in those circumstances. And I wonder if when we face circumstances, if we just take time, and it may take time and patience, to ask God, what are you doing in this? What should I do in this? Instead of us, kind of barreling ahead, say, okay, God, what can I learn? What are you doing? Is there an opportunity here that I don't see? And I think if we start to have that idea, first of all, we're going to look at our circumstances, even the really, really hard ones, very differently. We're not going to look at things that are difficult as necessarily obstacles, but instead we may look at them and say, okay, this could be an opportunity. And, how we look at obstacles is they have to be overcome or obliterated, but how we look at opportunities, we come to them very differently, and we are thankful for opportunities. And I wonder what it would look like if some of the things that we view as obstacles, we realize God sees that as an opportunity, and how we should come to that is very different. I wonder what difference that would make. So, just my thoughts for today. I hope you guys are doing well. Have a wonderful day.